The wind howled through the mountain pass like a wounded beast, carrying with it sheets of snow that turned the world into a white nightmare. Sergeant Maria Santos pressed herself against the rocky outcrop, her rifle scope fogging despite the protective lens cover. 24 hours ago, she had been preparing for Christmas leave at the military base in Colorado. Now she found herself trapped on this godforsaken mountain with a small rescue team, desperately trying to reach a crashed helicopter before the storm claimed more lives. The emergency call had come through at 0200 hours on Christmas Eve. A medical evacuation helicopter carrying a family of 4 and 2 crew members had gone down in the Rockies during what should have been a routine transport. The family had been traveling to Denver Children's Hospital where their 6-year-old daughter needed emergency surgery. The storm that meteorologists had predicted would pass harmlessly to the south had instead shifted north with devastating fury, catching the helicopter in winds that exceeded 90 miles per hour. Maria adjusted her position behind the boulder, scanning the valley below through her scope. The storm made visibility nearly impossible, but her training had taught her to see what others missed. She was one of only 12 female snipers in her unit, a distinction that had come through years of proving herself against doubt and discrimination. Her accuracy rate was among the highest in the regiment, but today her skills would be tested in ways she had never imagined. The rescue team consisted of 6 members, led by Captain James Rodriguez, a veteran of 3 tours in Afghanistan. Besides Maria, there was Corporal Mike Thompson, a medic whose steady hands had saved countless lives in combat zones. Specialist Lisa Chin served as their communications expert, maintaining contact with base camp through equipment that barely functioned in the electromagnetic chaos of the storm. Sergeant Dave Wilson handled explosives and breaching, while Private Tommy Martinez carried additional medical supplies and served as their pack mule. They had been climbing for 8 hours, fighting through snow that reached their waists in places. The helicopter had crashed somewhere near Eagles Peak, a treacherous area known for sudden weather changes and unstable rock formations. Search and rescue aircraft couldn't fly in these conditions, and ground vehicles couldn't navigate the terrain. The team was the only hope for the 6 people trapped in the wreckage. Maria's radio crackled to life through her earpiece. "Santos, this is Rodriguez. What do you see from up there?" She had taken point position on a ridge that offered the best vantage of their intended route. The captain had learned to trust her eyes more than any technological equipment they carried. She swept her scope across the landscape once more, noting wind patterns in the swirling snow, the way shadows fell across potential avalanche zones, and the barely visible track they needed to follow. "Sir, I've got movement at 2 o'clock, approximately 800 meters downslope. Could be our target area, but there's something else." She paused, studying what had caught her attention. "There are figures moving near those trees. 2 coordinated to be accident victims." The implications sent a chill through the team that had nothing to do with the sub-zero temperature. This area was known for militia activity, groups that used the remote wilderness to train and hide from federal authorities. Some were harmless survivalists, but others had proven hostile to military personnel and law enforcement. Rodriguez made a quick decision. "Hold position and maintain surveillance. We need to know what we're walking into before we commit to the descent." The team took cover behind a cluster of wind-twisted pines, their white camouflage making them nearly invisible against the snow-covered landscape. Maria focused her scope on the suspicious movement, adjusting for wind drift and the distortion caused by blowing snow. What she saw made her stomach tighten. For men in military-style clothing were positioned around what appeared to be the helicopter wreckage. They moved with tactical precision, weapons clearly visible. One was dragging something from the crash site, while the others maintained security positions. "Captain, we have armed hostiles at the crash site. For visible, possibly more. They're not rescue workers." Her voice remained steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. "It looks like they're looting the wreckage." The situation had just become exponentially more complicated. The rescue mission was now a combat operation in some of the most challenging terrain imaginable. The storm that had brought down the helicopter was also their enemy, but it might also provide the concealment they needed to approach undetected. Rodriguez gathered the team for a quick briefing, their voices barely audible above the wind. "Change of plans. We have hostiles between us and the survivors. Santos, you'll provide overwatch and cover for our approach. The rest of us will move in coordinated elements to neutralize the threat and secure the crash site. Maria nodded, already calculating distances and angles. Her position on the ridge gave her excellent fields of fire, but the wind would make long-range shots extremely challenging. She would need to get closer, but that meant leaving her current advantage for unknown risks below. As the team prepared to move out, Maria checked her equipment one final time. Her rifle was a precision instrument, modified for extreme weather conditions. She carried specialized ammunition designed for mountain warfare, and her scope had been calibrated that morning before the storm hit. Everything was ready except for the doubt that gnawed at her confidence. She had never fired at another human being outside of training exercises. Combat had always been theoretical, something that happened to other soldiers in distant places. Now, with Christmas carols probably playing on radios across America, she was preparing to potentially take lives to save lives. The moral complexity of the situation weighed on her, but the thought of innocent people suffering because of her hesitation was unbearable. The team began their descent, moving in practiced formation despite the treacherous conditions. Maria provided security from above, her scope tracking each member as they navigated between cover positions. The snow worked both for and against them, concealing their movement while also making every step potentially fatal. Through her earpiece, she heard Corporal Thompson's voice, tight with controlled emotion. "I can see the helicopter from here. There's definitely movement inside. At least some of the passengers survived the crash." This news brought both relief and increased urgency to their mission. Maria shifted her position to get a better angle on the hostiles below. As she moved, her foot struck a loose rock that went tumbling down the slope with a sound that seemed impossibly loud despite the storm. She froze, knowing that any competent lookout would have heard the noise despite the wind. The falling rock seemed to echo forever in Maria's ears, though she knew the sound had been swallowed by the storm within seconds. She remained motionless against the snow-covered slope, controlling her breathing while scanning the area below for any sign that the hostiles had detected her presence. Through her scope, she watched one of the armed men turn in her direction, his head tilted as if listening for something unusual. Minutes passed like hours before the man turned back to his companions. Maria exhaled slowly, grateful for the wind that had masked her mistake. She keyed her radio with a soft double click, the prearranged signal to let her team know she was still operational, but maintaining communication silence. Below her, Captain Rodriguez and his men had reached a position about 300 meters from the crash site. Maria could see them through her scope, dark shapes moving between the trees like ghosts in the swirling snow. The helicopter lay on its side in a small clearing, its rotor blades twisted into impossible angles. One side of the aircraft had been crushed against a massive boulder, but the passenger compartment appeared intact. Through her earpiece, she heard Rodriguez's whispered report. "Santos, I count 6 hostiles now, not 4. 2 more just emerged from the tree line on the north side of the wreckage. They're organized and well-equipped. This isn't some random group of scavengers." Maria adjusted her scope, finding the new targets. The additional hostiles were carrying what appeared to be electronic equipment, possibly communications gear or detection devices. One was setting up what looked like a portable antenna while the other operated a handheld scanner of some type. These weren't ordinary criminals or opportunistic looters. They had military training and sophisticated equipment. "Copy that, Captain. I have all 6 in sight now. The new arrivals are setting up communication equipment. They might be calling for backup or coordinating with other units." The implications were troubling. If this was part of a larger militia operation, the rescue team could find themselves facing overwhelming opposition. The storm showed no signs of abating. If anything, the wind had intensified, and the snow was falling so heavily that Maria had to frequently clear her scope lens. The temperature was dropping rapidly as night approached, and she knew that anyone injured in the helicopter crash wouldn't survive much longer in these conditions. Through her scope, she observed the hostiles more carefully. They moved with military precision, maintaining security positions and following what appeared to be standard small unit tactics. Their weapons were military-grade assault rifles, and They wore body armor under their winter camouflage. This wasn't a random encounter with local criminals. These men were trained soldiers or former military personnel with serious equipment and hostile intentions. One of the hostiles was now inside the helicopter, and Maria could hear faint shouts carried on the wind. Whether he was threatening the survivors or simply searching the wreckage, his presence inside the aircraft created a tactical nightmare. Any rescue attempt would have to account for potential hostages in immediate danger. Rodriguez's voice crackled through her earpiece. "We need to move soon. Thompson thinks he can see someone moving inside the helicopter, but we can't tell if they're injured or being held. The weather's getting worse, and we're losing light fast." Maria studied the tactical situation through her scope. The hostiles had positioned themselves well, with overlapping fields of fire and good cover among the trees and rocks around the crash site. A direct assault would be costly and might result in casualties among the survivors they were trying to rescue. But waiting wasn't an option either. Every minute they delayed increased the risk that the trapped passengers would succumb to their injuries or the cold. "Captain, I might have a solution," she whispered into her radio. "If I can reposition to that outcrop about 200 meters to your northwest, I'll have clear shots at 3 of the hostiles. The angle will also let me provide cover for your approach from their blind side." The position she was suggesting would require her to move across exposed ground while carrying all her equipment. In the current weather conditions, it would be dangerous and difficult, but it would also give her team the best chance of rescuing the helicopter survivors without anyone else getting killed. Negative, Santos. Too risky in these conditions. We'll find another way. Rodriguez was thinking like a commander, unwilling to risk one of his soldiers for a marginal tactical advantage. But Maria had already made her decision. She had studied the terrain for the past hour, memorizing every rock and tree. She knew exactly how to reach that position, and she understood that her team was running out of options. The survivors in the helicopter couldn't wait for a perfect plan to emerge. "Sir, with respect, this is what I trained for. Give me 15 minutes to get into position, then begin your approach. I'll take out their sentries and suppress the others while you move in to secure the crash site." Before Rodriguez could respond, Maria was already moving. She had stripped down to essential gear, leaving behind everything except her rifle, ammunition, and emergency medical supplies. The snow was knee-deep in places, but her legs were strong from years of mountain training. She had grown up in the Colorado Rockies, and this terrain was as familiar to her as city streets were to urban dwellers. Moving through the storm required all her concentration. Each step had to be planned and executed carefully to avoid creating noise or disturbing snow in ways that might be visible to the hostiles below. She used the natural contours of the landscape, following a depression that led toward her objective while keeping her below the sight lines of any lookouts. Halfway to her new position, she heard voices carried on the wind. The hostiles were talking among themselves, though she couldn't make out the words. What worried her was the tone. They sounded relaxed, almost casual. These weren't nervous criminals afraid of being caught. They were confident professionals who believed they controlled the situation. As she moved closer to the outcrop, Maria began to make out individual words in the conversations below. The hostiles were speaking English with regional American accents, confirming her suspicion that this was some type of domestic militia group rather than foreign operators. She heard references to packages and extraction, terms that suggested they were treating this incident as some type of operation rather than an opportunistic crime. The outcrop was a natural fortress of granite that had been carved by centuries of wind and weather. It provided excellent cover and concealment while offering clear sight lines to the crash site below. Maria settled into a firing position behind the rocks, using her pack to create a stable shooting rest. She methodically checked her rifle and scope, ensuring that everything was functioning properly despite the harsh conditions. From this new position, she had a much better view of the entire situation. The helicopter had indeed suffered severe damage, but the passenger compartment was intact. She could see movement inside the aircraft, confirming that at least some of the occupants had survived the crash. One of the hostiles was standing next to the wreckage, apparently guarding the entrance while his companions searched the area. Maria's training took over as she began to identify targets and calculate ranges. The guard by the helicopter was approximately 250 meters away, an easy shot under normal conditions, but challenging in the current wind and snow. The other hostiles were positioned at various distances up to 400 meters. Each shot would have to be perfect, because once she opened fire, the element of surprise would be lost forever. Maria's breath formed small clouds in the frigid air as she settled into her firing position. The granite outcrop provided excellent stability for her rifle, but the wind conditions were unlike anything she had trained for. Gusts were coming from multiple directions, swirling around the mountain peaks, and creating unpredictable air currents that would affect her bullet's trajectory. She would have to rely on instinct and experience rather than calculated ballistics. Through her scope, she watched the hostile guard beside the helicopter shift his weight from foot to foot, clearly uncomfortable in the bitter cold. His movement pattern was becoming predictable, which gave her an advantage. Every few minutes, he would turn his back to the wind to light a cigarette or adjust his equipment. Those moments of distraction would be her opportunity. Rodriguez's voice whispered through her earpiece. "Santos, we're in position. Can you see the interior of the aircraft from your angle?" Maria shifted her scope to peer through the helicopter's cracked windows. What she saw made her heart race. A woman was holding a small child, both of them conscious but clearly injured. An older man, probably the father, was slumped against one wall but appeared to be breathing. She couldn't see the helicopter crew from this angle, but movement near the cockpit suggested that at least one of them was alive. "Affirmative, Captain. I can see 3 survivors, possibly more. They're injured but alive. The guard is positioned where he can threaten them directly if we're not careful with our approach." The tactical situation was becoming clearer but more complex. The hostiles weren't just looting the wreckage. They were using the survivors as leverage. This suggested they knew about the rescue mission and were prepared for confrontation with military personnel. The level of organization and preparation indicated this was part of a larger operation. Maria began to notice details that troubled her. The hostiles were using hand signals to communicate, maintaining noise discipline despite the cover provided by the storm. Their positions formed interlocking fields of fire that would make any ground assault extremely costly. Most concerning was the sophisticated radio equipment they had deployed. These weren't backwoods survivalists playing soldier. These were professionals with military training and serious resources. One of the hostiles emerged from the tree line carrying what appeared to be additional weapons and ammunition. Maria counted at least 6 assault rifles, multiple handguns, and what looked like grenades or other explosive devices. If this escalated into a prolonged firefight, her team would be severely outgunned. "Captain, they're heavily armed and well-positioned. I count multiple automatic weapons and possible explosives. Recommend we consider negotiation before engaging." Rodriguez's response was immediate. "Negative. Intelligence reports suggest this group has been responsible for attacks on federal facilities in this region. They're not interested in negotiation, and we can't risk the survivors while we try to talk." Maria understood the captain's reasoning, but she also recognized that they were walking into a situation that could quickly spiral out of control. The storm that had initially worked in their favor was now becoming a liability. Visibility was deteriorating rapidly, and the temperature was dropping to life-threatening levels. Through her scope, she watched one of the hostiles approach the helicopter and begin shouting at the occupants inside. Even over the wind, she could hear the aggression in his voice. The man was making demands, though she couldn't make out the specific words. The woman inside the aircraft was shaking her head, apparently refusing whatever he was asking for. The hostile raised his rifle, pointing it directly at the woman and child. Maria's finger moved instinctively to her trigger, but she held her fire. She was too far away to guarantee a clean shot in these conditions, and missing would likely result in the immediate execution of the hostages. "Captain, situation is escalating. The hostiles are threatening the survivors directly. We need to act now." Rodriguez's team began their approach, moving in coordinated pairs through the forest toward the crash site. Maria tracked their progress through her scope while maintaining surveillance on the hostiles. The rescue team moved like ghosts through the trees, using the storm as cover to get within striking distance. The hostile who had been threatening the survivors suddenly turned and walked away from the helicopter, apparently satisfied with whatever response he had received. Maria breathed a sigh of relief, but her tension remained high. The situation was volatile and could change instantly. As Rodriguez's team moved closer, Maria began to acquire specific targets through her scope. She would need to eliminate the sentries first, clearing a path for the assault team to reach the helicopter without being detected. The two hostiles with communications equipment were her primary targets, as they could call for backup or coordinate defensive actions. The first target was positioned behind a fallen log about 300 meters from her position. He was scanning the forest with binoculars, apparently serving as an early warning system for the group. The second target was operating the radio equipment near a cluster of pine trees, occasionally speaking into a handheld device. Maria calculated wind speed and direction based on the movement of snow and debris. The wind was gusting irregularly, which meant she would have to time her shots carefully to coincide with brief lulls in the air currents. She had trained for this type of shooting, but never with lives hanging in the balance. Santos, we're moving into assault position. On my mark, take out the sentries and provide covering fire for our advance. Rodriguez's voice carried the calm authority of a veteran combat leader. Maria settled the crosshairs of her scope on her first target. The hostile was still using his binoculars, presenting a stationary target. She controlled her breathing, feeling her heart rate slow as her training took over. The cold was making her muscles stiff, but her grip on the rifle remained steady. Roger that, Captain. First target acquired. Waiting for your mark. The moment stretched out as she waited for Rodriguez's command. Around her, the storm continued its assault on the mountain. But Maria had entered the focused state of mind that separated professional snipers from ordinary soldiers. The cold, the wind, and the moral weight of what she was about to do all faded into the background. There was only the target, the crosshairs, and the mission. Through her earpiece, she heard the soft sounds of Rodriguez's team moving into final position. They were professionals, but, in these conditions, even the most careful movement created some noise. She prayed that the hostiles were too focused on the helicopter and its occupants to notice the approaching danger. Santos, this is Rodriguez. We are in position. Execute. The word hung in the air for a fraction of a second before Maria squeezed the trigger. The rifle bucked against her shoulder, and, through her scope, she watched her first target collapse behind the fallen log. Without hesitation, she shifted to her second target, the hostile operating the radio equipment. The man was already turning toward the sound of her first shot when her second bullet found its mark. He dropped immediately, the radio equipment scattering across the snow. Around the crash site, the remaining hostiles were shouting and scrambling for defensive positions. 2 targets down, Maria reported calmly into her radio. Remaining hostiles are taking cover near the helicopter. You have a clear approach from the north. Rodriguez's team erupted from the tree line like avenging spirits, their white camouflage making them nearly invisible against the snow. The hostiles, caught off guard by the sudden assault, began firing wildly in multiple directions. Maria could hear the distinctive crack of assault rifle fire echoing through the valley. The sound of gunfire cracked through the mountain air like deadly thunder, echoing off the surrounding peaks and mixing with the howling wind. Maria tracked the remaining hostiles through her scope as they scrambled for defensive positions around the helicopter wreckage. The 2 men she had eliminated had been their early warning system, and their sudden loss had thrown the entire group into chaos. Rodriguez's team moved with lethal precision through the snow, their training evident in every calculated step. Corporal Thompson and Specialist Chun approached from the north while Sergeant Wilson and Private Martinez flanked from the east. Captain Rodriguez moved straight toward the helicopter, trusting his team to clear the obstacles in his path. Through her scope, Maria watched one of the remaining hostiles take cover behind a large boulder and raise his assault rifle toward Rodriguez's position. Without hesitation, she adjusted her aim and fired. The hostile spun and fell into the snow, his weapon flying from his hands. The suppressive fire from her elevated position was forcing the remaining enemies to keep their heads down, giving the assault team crucial seconds to close the distance. Santos, beautiful shot. Rodriguez's voice came through her earpiece between bursts of automatic weapons fire. Keep them pinned down while we secure the aircraft. Maria shifted her aim to another hostile who was trying to maneuver toward the helicopter's passenger compartment. The man was clearly attempting to use the survivors as human shields, a tactic that would complicate any rescue attempt. She fired again, her bullet striking the ground inches from his feet and sending up a spray of snow and dirt. The hostile dove for cover, abandoning his approach to the aircraft. The firefight was intense, but brief. Rodriguez's team had trained for this type of close-quarters combat in mountainous terrain, and their coordinated assault was overwhelming the disorganized hostiles. Within minutes, the shooting began to subside as the remaining enemies either surrendered or fled into the surrounding forest. Crash site secure, Rodriguez reported. Thompson, get to those survivors now. Wilson, establish a perimeter. Chun, try to raise base camp and request immediate medical evacuation. Maria maintained her overwatch position, scanning the surrounding forest for any signs of fleeing hostiles or potential reinforcements. The communications equipment she had observed earlier suggested that this group might be part of a larger network, and there was no guarantee that help wasn't already en route. Through her scope, she watched Corporal Thompson approach the helicopter carefully, his medical kit ready. The aircraft's passenger compartment had been damaged in the crash, and the door was jammed shut. Thompson began working to pry it open while Rodriguez covered him with his rifle. Santos, can you see any movement in the tree line? Rodriguez asked. We need to know if any of them got away. Maria swept her scope across the forest surrounding the crash site. The storm made tracking difficult, but she had been watching the area carefully during the firefight. I count 2 hostiles who fled into the woods to the southeast. They were moving fast and appeared to be unarmed. No sign of organized retreat or regrouping. The helicopter door finally gave way under Thompson's efforts, and he immediately began assessing the survivors inside. Through her radio, Maria could hear him calling out medical information to the team. We've got 4 survivors, 2 adults and 2 children, all conscious but injured. The pilot is unconscious with head trauma. The co-pilot didn't make it. The news hit the team hard. They had risked their lives and taken the lives of others to reach this point, but they hadn't been able to save everyone. The co-pilot's death was a stark reminder of how quickly the situation could have become much worse. Thompson, what's the status on the survivors? Rodriguez asked. Can they be moved? The father has a broken leg and possible internal injuries. The mother has a concussion and lacerations. The 6-year-old girl appears to have a broken arm, and the older boy has hypothermia, but is responsive. The pilot needs immediate neurosurgery if he's going to survive. Maria continued her surveillance while listening to the medical assessment. The storm was intensifying again, and she knew that any medical evacuation would be extremely dangerous in these conditions. Even if they could reach a safe landing zone, no helicopter pilot would attempt a rescue flight in this weather. Captain, Chin's voice crackled through the radio. I've got base camp on the radio. They're saying no air support is possible until the storm passes. Current weather projections show at least 6 more hours before conditions improve enough for flight operations. The reality of their situation began to sink in. They were trapped on the mountain with injured survivors, limited medical supplies, and the possibility of hostile reinforcements arriving at any time. The storm that had provided cover for their approach was now their greatest enemy. Rodriguez made the decision that would define the rest of their mission. We're going to have to shelter in place and wait out the storm. Thompson, do what you can for the injured. Wilson, help me secure this crash site for extended occupation. Santos, maintain overwatch from your position. Maria acknowledged the order while calculating the tactical implications. From her elevated position, she could see for miles in every direction when the snow squalls permitted. She would be their early warning system against any counterattack while also serving as long-range fire support if needed. The rescue team began converting the crash site into a defensive position. Wilson used his explosives expertise to create barriers from fallen trees and debris, while Rodriguez organized the survivors and equipment inside the damaged helicopter. Thompson worked frantically to stabilize the injured, using every medical supply they had brought with them. As the afternoon wore on, Maria watched her teammates work with professional dedication despite the increasingly desperate circumstances. The temperature was dropping rapidly, and the wind was reaching dangerous levels. Even with shelter, the survivors were at risk of succumbing to exposure before morning. Through her scope, she observed Rodriguez speaking with the father of the injured family. The man appeared to be conscious and alert despite his injuries, and Maria could see him gesturing toward his children with obvious concern. The family had been traveling to Denver for the little girl's surgery, and now they were trapped in conditions that threatened all their lives. Santos, this is Rodriguez. I need you to keep scanning for any signs of activity. Intel suggests this militia group operates in cells, and they might send reinforcements when this team fails to report in. Maria adjusted her position to get a better view of the access routes to their location. The storm provided excellent concealment, but it also made detection of approaching threats nearly impossible until they were very close. She would have to rely on her training and instincts to spot danger before it could threaten the survivors. As darkness began to fall across the mountain, Maria realized that the longest night of her life was just beginning. The Christmas Eve that should have been spent with family and friends was instead being spent in a life-or-death struggle against both human enemies and the brutal forces of nature. But looking down at the helicopter where her teammates were fighting to save innocent lives, she knew there was nowhere else she would rather be. The storm showed no signs of abating, and the radio reports from base camp confirmed that no rescue would be possible until morning at the earliest. They were on their own, surrounded by hostile territory and extreme weather, with limited supplies and several critically injured people depending on their protection. The real test of their training and courage was just beginning. The temperature had dropped to nearly 20 degrees below zero when Maria first spotted the lights moving through the forest. It was past midnight on Christmas morning, and she had been maintaining her vigilant watch for over 8 hours. Her body ached from the cold and the strain of staying motionless in her firing position, but her mind remained sharp and focused. Through her night vision scope, she could see at least 6 figures moving methodically through the trees toward the crash site. They were armed and advancing in tactical formation, clearly not a search and rescue team. The reinforcements that Rodriguez had predicted were finally arriving, and they appeared to be well organized and heavily equipped. Captain, this is Santos. I have multiple hostiles approaching from the southwest. Count 6 visible, possibly more. They're approximately 800 meters out and advancing in coordinated formation. Rodriguez's response was immediate and calm. Copy that. Can you determine their equipment and intentions? Maria studied the approaching figures through her scope. They were carrying assault rifles and moving with the discipline of trained soldiers. Unlike the earlier group, these hostiles appeared to have night vision equipment and were communicating through hand signals rather than radio transmissions. They knew exactly where they were going and what they would find when they arrived. They're professional military, well equipped with night vision and automatic weapons. Based on their movement pattern, they know the location of the crash site and are approaching for assault, not reconnaissance. Inside the helicopter, Thompson continued working to keep the injured survivors stable. The pilot's condition had deteriorated throughout the night, and the little girl's hypothermia was becoming critical despite their efforts to keep her warm. Time was running out for the medical evacuations, but now they faced an immediate tactical threat that could end all hopes of rescue. Santos, can you delay their approach with precision fire? Rodriguez asked. We need time to prepare defensive positions and protect the survivors. Maria calculated distances and angles while tracking the advancing hostiles. At 800 meters in these weather conditions, precise shooting would be extremely challenging. But she had trained for this exact scenario, and her rifle was capable of accurate fire at much greater distances. Affirmative, Captain. I can engage the lead elements and force them to take cover. That should slow their advance and give you time to prepare. She selected her first target, the apparent leader of the group who was moving slightly ahead of the others. Through her scope, she could see him studying the crash site through binoculars, probably assessing the tactical situation and planning his attack. Maria controlled her breathing and squeezed the trigger. The shot echoed across the mountain, and The hostile leader dropped immediately. The remaining figures scattered for cover among the trees, their coordinated advance suddenly disrupted. Maria quickly shifted to her secondary targets, firing carefully aimed shots that forced the hostiles to abandon their planned approach. Multiple targets engaged, she reported. Their advance is stalled, but they're taking cover and regrouping. Estimate they'll resume approach within 10 minutes. Rodriguez's team used the precious time to strengthen their defensive positions around the helicopter. Wilson positioned explosive charges at key choke points where the hostiles would be forced to approach, while Chun established communication with any aircraft that might be able to provide support once the weather cleared. The family trapped inside the helicopter was aware of the danger, but remained remarkably calm. The father, despite his broken leg, helped Thompson organize medical supplies and prepare for the possibility of treating combat casualties. The mother kept her children quiet and calm, understanding that their survival depended on the soldiers fighting to protect them. Maria continued her surveillance, watching for any signs of hostile movement. The enemy had learned to respect her marksmanship and were no longer advancing openly through the forest. Instead, they were moving carefully from cover to cover, using the terrain and storm to mask their approach. Santos, we're detecting radio traffic on militia frequencies, Chen reported. They're calling for additional support and discussing assault tactics. Estimate we'll be facing at least 12 hostiles within the next hour. The tactical situation was deteriorating rapidly. Rodriguez's team was outnumbered and running low on ammunition after the earlier firefight. The survivors needed immediate medical attention that could only be provided at a hospital, but evacuation was impossible until the storm passed and the hostile threat was neutralized. As dawn approached, the storm finally began to show signs of weakening. The wind was still strong, but the snow had reduced to occasional flurries instead of the blizzard conditions that had prevailed throughout the night. Maria could see further through her scope, which gave her better fields of fire, but also made her position more vulnerable to detection. Captain, weather conditions are improving. We might have air support options within the next few hours. But the improving weather also worked in favor of the hostiles. Through her scope, Maria could now see that they had positioned themselves in a semicircle around the crash site, with multiple automatic weapons and what appeared to be rocket-propelled grenades. They were preparing for a coordinated assault that would overwhelm the rescue team's defensive positions. Rodriguez made a command decision that demonstrated his leadership and tactical acumen. Santos, I need you to relocate to the crash site. We're going to consolidate our defensive positions and make our stand here. Your long-range fire is valuable, but we need every rifle down here for the final assault. Maria understood the implications of the order. Leaving her elevated position would eliminate their overwatch capability and early warning system. But it would also concentrate their firepower at the point where the battle would be won or lost. She began packing her equipment for the dangerous movement to the crash site. The descent through hostile territory required all of Maria's mountain warfare training. She moved quickly but carefully, using natural cover and the remaining snow squalls to mask her movement. Behind her, she could hear the distinctive sounds of the hostiles moving into assault positions. She reached the helicopter just as the first rocket-propelled grenade exploded against the rocks 30 meters away. The hostiles had begun their final assault, and the crash site erupted in automatic weapons fire from multiple directions. Rodriguez's team returned fire from their prepared positions, but they were clearly outgunned and outnumbered. Thompson, get those survivors as low as possible, Rodriguez shouted over the gunfire. Wilson, detonate charges on the southeast approach. Santos, take position on the north side and cover our flanks. Maria found cover behind the helicopter's damaged engine compartment and began engaging targets as they appeared. Her precision rifle was designed for long-range shooting, but at close range, it was devastatingly effective against the hostiles attempting to overrun their positions. The battle raged for 20 minutes before the sound of helicopter rotors became audible over the gunfire. Two military attack helicopters appeared through the clearing storm clouds, their door gunners immediately engaging the hostile positions with devastating effect. This is Blackhawk 77, came the voice through their radio. We have your position marked, and are engaging hostile forces. Prepare survivors for immediate evacuation. Within minutes, the combined firepower of the rescue team and air support had neutralized the hostile threat. The surviving militia members either surrendered or fled into the surrounding wilderness, leaving behind their wounded and dead. A medical evacuation helicopter landed in the clearing as soon as the area was secured. The injured survivors were quickly loaded aboard, with Thompson accompanying them to provide medical support during the flight to Denver. The little girl who had needed surgery was conscious and alert as she was carried to the aircraft, her small hand waving goodbye to the soldiers who had saved her life. As the helicopters disappeared into the brightening Christmas morning sky, Maria stood with her teammates amid the wreckage and debris of their desperate battle. They were exhausted, cold, and emotionally drained, but they had accomplished their mission. 7 lives had been saved through their courage and professional skill. Rodriguez gathered his team for the flight back to base. As they climbed aboard the transport helicopter, Maria looked back at the crash site where so much had happened in such a short time. The mountain looked peaceful now, covered in fresh snow that would soon hide all traces of the violence that had occurred there. Later that Christmas day, as Maria sat in the base hospital being treated for hypothermia and exhaustion, she received word that all the survivors were doing well. The pilot had undergone successful neurosurgery, the little girl's operation had been completed without complications, and the entire family was expected to make full recoveries. The medal ceremony would come later, along with the official recognition and commendations. But, for Maria, the greatest reward was knowing that her voice had been heard when she commanded, "Fall back," during those crucial moments that saved innocent lives. On a Christmas night when most people were celebrating with their families, she had been exactly where she needed to be, doing exactly what she had trained to do, proving that heroism often comes in the form of duty quietly and expertly performed.